The morning started with a rush of cold air and the sharp sound of an alarm clock that refused to stop ringing. Michael Carter opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling for a few seconds before realizing what day it was. He had been preparing for this business trip for weeks. The meeting in New York could change everything for him. He had spent late nights going through presentations, memorizing figures, and polishing his proposal. If everything went right, this trip might finally bring him the promotion he had been dreaming of. He jumped out of bed, still half asleep, and hurried to the shower. The water was lukewarm, but he didn't care. He only had one thought in mind: to reach the airport on time. The streets outside were already alive with early commuters. The sound of car horns, the smell of coffee from a nearby cafe, and the chatter of people filled the air. Michael grabbed his small black suitcase, checked his documents twice, and locked the door behind him. The ride to the airport was a mix of excitement and nervousness. He watched the city roll past through the window, shops opening, buses packed, with office workers and people walking quickly to catch their trains. He thought about how this meeting could finally show his boss that he was more than just another employee. Maybe, he thought, if he closed this deal, he could afford to take his parents on a small vacation. The thought made him smile for a moment. But as the taxi moved into heavier traffic, his smile faded. A long line of cars stretched ahead. He looked at the time on his watch and sighed. The minutes were slipping away too fast. The driver noticed his worried expression and said in a calm voice, "Don't worry, sir. We'll get there. Just a little jam." Michael nodded, though his heart kept racing. He tried to distract himself by going through his notes on his phone, but the words no longer made sense. He kept glancing outside, watching the slow movement of cars. When the taxi finally reached the airport entrance, he paid the driver quickly, thanked him, and ran toward the terminal. Inside, the place was buzzing with people dragging suitcases, announcements echoing overhead, and the smell of fresh pastries from a nearby counter. Michael joined the security line, trying to stay calm. He checked the digital board and saw his flight number flashing in yellow. Final boarding. His stomach dropped. He still had to clear security. He looked around, hoping the line would move faster, but it barely did. A family in front of him was struggling with their bags, and a man behind him was arguing with a guard about the weight of his luggage. Michael felt sweat forming on his forehead. He knew if he missed this flight, there would be no other one that could get him to the meeting in time. When it was finally his turn, he rushed through security, grabbed his bag from the conveyor, and ran toward the gate. His shoes squeaked against the polished floor as he weaved through the crowd, dodging people and pulling his suitcase behind him. He could hear his name being announced over the speakers. Last call for passenger Michael Carter for Flight 729 to New York. His heart pounded louder with every step. He reached the gate area, breathing heavily. The gate was still open. Relief washed over him, and he quickened his pace. But just as he was about to reach the boarding desk, he noticed something unusual out of the corner of his eye. Near a row of benches, an older woman sat hunched forward, one hand gripping her chest. She looked pale, her breathing shallow and uneven. People passed by her without noticing, too busy with their own flights and phones. Michael froze for a moment, torn. He could almost hear the boarding agent calling again, urging the last few passengers to hurry. He looked from the gate to the woman and back again. He could easily pretend he hadn't seen her. Just a few more steps, and he would be on the plane. No one would know. No one would blame him. But something deep inside refused to let him walk away. He dropped his suitcase beside the bench and knelt down. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked gently. The woman opened her eyes slightly but didn't answer. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no words came out. Her breathing was getting weaker. Michael looked around. "Excuse me," he shouted toward the crowd. "Can someone get medical help?" A few heads turned, but most people kept walking. The woman's hand slipped off her lap. Michael quickly reached for it. "Hang on, ma'am. Help is coming." A young airport worker finally noticed and ran over. "What happened?" he asked. "She's having trouble breathing," Michael said quickly. "Call the medical team." The worker radioed for help, and within moments, a pair of paramedics arrived, pushing a small stretcher and carrying medical bags. They asked Michael to step back, but he stayed nearby, watching anxiously. The older woman's eyes fluttered open again for a second, and she looked straight at him. There was something thankful in her expression, as if she understood he had stayed. Then her eyes closed again. As the paramedics began their work, attaching wires and checking her pulse, the boarding gate closed behind him. He heard the faint sound of the door locking, followed by the announcement that Flight 729 had departed. The realization hit him like a weight. He had missed his flight. He stood there quietly watching as they lifted the woman onto the stretcher. His meeting, his promotion, all the effort he had put in, it all seemed to slip away in that single moment. Yet when one of the paramedics turned to him and said, "Thanks for helping her. You might have saved her life," he felt something unexpected, a strange sense of calm. When they started wheeling her away, Michael asked if he could know which hospital they were taking her to. "St. Mary's," one of them said before rushing off. For a few seconds, Michael stood there in silence. The noise of the airport seemed distant now, the chatter of people, the announcements, the rolling of suitcases, it all blurred together. He slowly picked up his bag, looked at the now empty gate, and took a deep breath. He walked back toward the ticketing counter to rebook his flight. The airline representative looked at him sympathetically when she checked his ticket. "I'm sorry, sir. That was the last flight for the morning. We can get you on the next one at 4 in the afternoon." Michael nodded. "That's fine," he said quietly. She printed a new boarding pass and handed it to him. "There's a cafe down the hall if you'd like to wait," she added kindly. He thanked her and walked away. As he sat down at the cafe with a cup of black coffee, he stared out the window at the planes taking off. Part of him was disappointed, of course. Missing that meeting could mean a lot of explaining later. But another part of him couldn't stop thinking about the woman. What if he hadn't stopped? What if no one else had noticed? The thought lingered in his mind for a long time. He remembered her frail hands, her frightened eyes, and how the color had slowly returned to her face once the medics arrived. Maybe, he thought, some things were more important than a flight. An hour passed, then 2. He called his office to explain what had happened. His manager sounded upset at first, but softened when Michael mentioned the medical emergency. "You did the right thing," his manager finally said. "We'll reschedule." After hanging up, Michael felt a wave of relief. The meeting wasn't lost after all. He smiled faintly and took another sip of his coffee. Later, as he walked around the terminal to stretch his legs, he passed a television playing the news on mute. He didn't pay much attention until he caught sight of a familiar face on the screen. It was the woman he had helped. A reporter stood outside a hospital, and though the volume was off, the text on the screen mentioned an unidentified elderly passenger collapsing at the airport. He couldn't help but wonder who she was. She didn't look like someone traveling alone. Her clothes were neat and expensive, and the ring on her hand looked old and valuable, like a family heirloom. When it was finally time to board his afternoon flight, Michael felt different, quieter, more reflective. He had started the day thinking only about his own goals, his own success. But sometimes life had other plans. As the plane lifted off the ground, he looked out the window, watching the clouds drift by. He thought of the woman again, hoping she was all right. He didn't know her name or anything about her, but for some reason it felt like their paths had crossed for a reason. He leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and let the hum of the engines calm him. Somewhere between regret and peace, he found a small sense of gratitude. He had missed his flight, yes, but maybe, just maybe, he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The next morning, Michael woke up in his hotel room with sunlight slipping through the thin curtains. For a few seconds, he didn't remember where he was. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. The missed flight, the old woman at the airport, the paramedics, and the long wait before catching the afternoon plane. He rubbed his eyes and sat up slowly. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a reminder for the meeting that had been rescheduled for later that day. He sighed in relief. Missing the flight hadn't ruined everything after all. Still, something about what had happened kept replaying in his mind. The woman's face, Her weak voice, the way she looked at him for just a moment before closing her eyes. He couldn't forget it. He stood by the window and looked out at the busy streets below. People were walking to work, taxis honking, the world moving as usual. But he felt a little different. There was a quietness in his thoughts, like he had seen something that reminded him what really mattered. After getting ready, he went downstairs for breakfast. The smell of fresh bread and coffee filled the hotel dining area. He sat alone by the window with a plate of eggs and toast, glancing now and then at the newspaper someone had left on the next table. He wasn't really reading, though. His mind wandered back to the airport. He remembered the name of the hospital the paramedics had mentioned, St. Mary's. He thought about calling or visiting, just to check if the woman was all right. But then he wondered if that would be strange. He didn't know her name, her family, or anything about her. Maybe she wouldn't even remember him. Still, something inside him told him to ask. After breakfast, he decided to call. He looked up the hospital's number and dialed it. When a nurse answered, he explained what had happened at the airport and asked if an elderly woman had been brought in from there the day before. The nurse was quiet for a moment, checking records. "Yes," she said finally. "We do have a woman who fits that description. She's stable now, resting, but we can't give out her personal details." "That's okay," Michael said quickly. "I just wanted to know if she was all right." "She's doing much better today," the nurse replied. "You really helped her, whoever you are." Michael smiled faintly. "I'm glad she's okay," he said before hanging up. He felt lighter after that call. It was strange how a small act, something that had taken only minutes, could stay with him for so long. Maybe it was because deep down, he knew he could have easily walked away, but he hadn't. And now knowing that she was safe made everything else seem less important. The meeting that afternoon went well. He was calm, confident, and more focused than usual. His colleagues noticed it too. One of them even said, "You seem different today, more relaxed." Michael just smiled. "Maybe I am," he said. By evening, after the long day of discussions and presentations, he returned to his hotel feeling tired but satisfied. The city light sparkled outside his window as he loosened his tie and sat on the edge of the bed. He turned on the TV for background noise, flipping through channels without paying attention. Just as he was about to switch it off, a local news segment caught his ear. The reporter was standing outside St. Mary's Hospital, talking about a story that sounded oddly familiar. He turned up the volume. An elderly woman who collapsed at the city airport yesterday is recovering well thanks to the quick action of a bystander. The hospital has not released her name, but sources say she's expected to make a full recovery. The man who helped her left before reporters could identify him. Michael stared at the screen, surprised. He hadn't thought what he did was newsworthy. To him, it had just been a moment of doing the right thing. But hearing it mentioned on TV made him feel proud and a little shy at the same time. He didn't like attention, but it was comforting to know she was improving. He turned off the television, sat back, and thought about how fast life could change. One small decision to stop and help had changed the direction of his entire day. Maybe even more than that, though he didn't know it yet. The next morning, his flight back home was peaceful. He read a little, listened to music, and thought about visiting his parents for the weekend. When he landed, the first thing he did was check his phone. There were a few messages from work, but nothing urgent. He decided to take a cab straight home instead of heading to the office. On the way, he couldn't help but glance at the hospital as they passed by one on the main road. For a second, he wondered what it would be like to meet the woman again, to see her awake, smiling, and healthy. But then he told himself that she probably had family around her now. People who cared for her far more than a stranger who happened to be at the right place at the right time. Over the next few days, life returned to its usual rhythm. Meetings, calls, emails, and long commutes filled his schedule. But something had changed quietly inside him. He found himself noticing people more, helping an old man carry his bag up the stairs at the train station, holding the door open for strangers, greeting the barista by name at his morning coffee stop. Small things, but they felt right. One evening, as he was leaving his office, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Hello?" he answered. "Good evening. Is this Mr. Michael Carter?" A woman's voice asked politely. "Yes, speaking. This is Nurse Allen from St. Mary's Hospital. The woman you helped at the airport asked if we could contact you. She's been discharged and wanted to thank you personally." Michael was surprised. Oh, she remembered me. She did, the nurse said with a smile in her voice. She's very grateful. If you don't mind, she asked if she could get your contact information. Or, if you prefer, I can give you hers. Michael hesitated for a moment, then said, Please give her mine. Of course, she'll probably call you soon, the nurse said before hanging up. He stood still for a while, phone still in his hand. He hadn't expected to hear from her. He wondered what she would say or what he would say. He remembered her fragile hands, her soft gray hair, and the quiet fear in her eyes that day. It felt strange to think she wanted to thank him. The next day passed slowly. Every time his phone buzzed, he thought it might be her. By evening, he had almost given up waiting when his phone finally rang again. Hello, is this Mr. Carter? A gentle, slightly shaky voice asked. Yes, it is, he replied. Is this the lady from the airport? She chuckled softly. Yes, dear. My name is Margaret. I've been trying to find a way to reach you. The nurse gave me your number. I'm so glad to hear your voice, Michael said warmly. I was worried, but they told me you were recovering. I am, thanks to you, she said. If you hadn't stopped that day, I don't know what would have happened. Everyone just walked past me. You were the only one who cared. Michael felt his throat tighten a little. Anyone would have done the same, he said quietly. Not everyone, Margaret said kindly. You could have missed your flight, you know. I did, he admitted with a small laugh. But it was worth it. There was a pause, and then she said softly, I'd like to meet you if you don't mind. Just to thank you properly. Michael hesitated for only a second before saying, Of course, I'd be happy to. They agreed to meet the following week after she had rested a bit more. As he ended the call, he couldn't help but smile. Something about her voice reminded him of his grandmother, gentle, warm, and full of gratitude. The days leading up to the meeting felt different. He wasn't nervous exactly, but curious. He wondered who she really was. Her clothes and the jewelry she wore at the airport had looked elegant, suggesting she wasn't just another traveler. Maybe she had family in the city, or maybe she was visiting someone important. Whatever the case, he was just glad she was alive and recovering. He didn't tell anyone at work about it. It felt too personal, something private that didn't need to be turned into a story. He didn't want praise or attention. He just wanted to see that she was okay. On the day of the meeting, he left work early. The autumn air was cool, and the sky had that golden glow that comes just before sunset. As he walked toward the small cafe near the park where they had agreed to meet, he saw her sitting by the window, a cup of tea in front of her. She looked healthier now. Her face had color again, and her smile was warm. She stood slowly as he approached, her eyes lighting up. Michael, she said softly, I finally get to meet you properly. He smiled and shook her hand gently. It's good to see you looking so well. They sat down, and for a while she just talked about her family, her health, and how she had been traveling for work before everything happened. She didn't say much about what she did, only that her daughter had been worried sick. Michael listened quietly, touched by her kindness. There was something graceful about her, something calm and strong beneath the frail exterior. As they talked, a faint thought crossed his mind that this meeting wasn't the end of the story. Somehow, he felt it was just the beginning of something much larger than he could imagine. The afternoon sun was soft and golden, falling through the cafe window where Michael and Margaret sat. The quiet murmur of other customers filled the air, mixed with the faint clinking of cups and the smell of roasted coffee. Margaret looked much stronger than the day he had seen her at the airport. Her hand still trembled a little as she lifted her cup, but her smile was steady and kind. I've been waiting to thank you in person, she said, her voice gentle. I've traveled all my life and I've seen all kinds of people, but it's rare to meet someone who'll stop everything to help a stranger. Michael smiled shyly. I just did what anyone should do, he said. Maybe, she replied, but very few actually do it. He didn't quite know what to say. He wasn't used to being praised like that. To him, helping her wasn't an act of heroism. It was simply the right thing. Still, hearing her speak with such warmth made him feel something deep inside, a quiet kind of happiness he couldn't explain. They talked for a while about simple things, travel, food, weather, and how unpredictable life could be. Margaret mentioned that she'd been planning to visit her daughter before her sudden illness stopped her. She insisted I take a few weeks off work, but you know how hard it is to step away from responsibilities, she said with a light laugh. Michael smiled politely but couldn't help wondering what kind of work she did. She seemed too elegant to be an ordinary office employee. There was grace in her words and confidence in her posture. The kind of calm you only see in people who've led others or built something meaningful. But he didn't ask. It didn't feel right to pry. After a while, Margaret looked at him thoughtfully. "What about you, Michael? What do you do?" "I work as an engineer," he said. "Mostly in safety systems for transportation. It's not glamorous, but I like it. Keeps me busy." "Safety systems," she repeated softly as if the words meant something more to her. "That sounds very important." "I guess so," he replied with a shrug. "We try to make sure people don't get hurt because of design flaws or negligence. Sometimes it feels like a small job, but I like knowing it matters." She smiled. "Nothing small about protecting people. The world could use more minds that think like yours." He felt his cheeks grow warm at her words. He looked down at his coffee cup, stirring it slowly, though it was already cold. There was a pause in their conversation, but it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful. Two people sitting in shared silence, both grateful for something they couldn't quite name. After a few minutes, Margaret glanced at her watch and sighed. "I should probably be going soon. My daughter will start worrying if I stay out too long." Michael nodded. "Of course. I'm just glad we got to meet." She smiled again, that same calm, kind smile. "I'm glad too, dear. You may not know it now, but your kindness made a bigger difference than you think." He didn't fully understand what she meant, but he smiled anyway. "I'm just happy you're okay." When they stood up, she gently placed a hand on his arm. "If it's all right with you," she said, "I'd like to stay in touch. I don't often meet people I feel this grateful toward." "I'd like that," he replied. They exchanged numbers, and she left in a black car that seemed too fancy for someone who had called herself an ordinary traveler. Michael watched as the car disappeared down the street, his mind still filled with her words. He had no idea that their paths were only beginning to cross. Over the next week, life returned to its usual rhythm. But something about that meeting stayed with him. Every now and then his phone would buzz with a message from her. Short, polite notes asking how his week was going or thanking him again for helping her. Her tone was always warm and caring, and somehow her messages made his days lighter. One morning while he was on his way to work, his phone rang. It was an unknown number again. When he answered, a woman's voice said politely, "Hello, is this Mr. Michael Carter?" "Yes, speaking. Good morning. My name is Evelyn. I'm calling on behalf of my mother, Margaret Hart." Michael recognized the name instantly and smiled. "Ah, yes. How is she doing?" "She's doing much better," Evelyn said warmly. "She told me about what you did for her at the airport. I wanted to thank you personally." "Oh, you don't need to thank me," he said modestly. "I'm just glad she's all right." "Well, you're being humble, but I've heard the whole story. You gave up an important flight to help her," she said. "That's not something people do often." Michael laughed softly. "I guess it was just a moment of instinct." "She told me you work in safety systems." Evelyn asked. "Yes, that's right." "I see. That's interesting. Would you be open to meeting us again sometime? My mother wanted to introduce you to someone." Michael was a little surprised. "Introduce me?" "Yes," Evelyn said. She didn't explain much, but she seemed quite determined about it. "If you're free, we could meet for lunch later this week." He thought for a moment, curious. "Sure, I'd be happy to." They agreed on a time and place, a restaurant near the edge of the city known for its quiet atmosphere and garden view. When the day came, Michael arrived early, dressed neatly in a light blue shirt and dark jacket. The restaurant had soft music playing, and the smell of baked bread drifting through the air. He found a table by the window, ordered some water, and waited. A few minutes later, Margaret arrived, walking slowly but gracefully, supported by her daughter. Evelyn was in her 30s, dressed in a simple but elegant outfit. She had the same calm eyes as her mother. "Michael," Margaret greeted him with a warm smile. "I'm so glad you came." "It's good to see you again," he said. "This is my daughter Evelyn," Margaret said proudly. "The one I told you about." Evelyn extended her hand with a polite smile. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mr. Carter. You've made quite an impression on my mother." Michael shook her hand, feeling slightly embarrassed. "She gives me too much credit," he said lightly. They all sat down, and the conversation flowed easily. Margaret spoke about her recovery, while Evelyn asked questions about his work and background. Michael noticed how they both listened with genuine interest. There was something about them, calm, confident, but also humble. After a while, Evelyn excused herself to take a call, leaving Margaret and Michael alone for a moment. Margaret looked at him with that same thoughtful expression she'd worn before. "You remind me of someone," she said quietly. "Who's that?" "My late husband," she replied softly. "He always believed that people should lead with kindness, even when it doesn't seem convenient. He used to say, 'How you treat people when no one's watching says everything about who you are.' You remind me of that." Michael was touched by her words. "That's very kind of you to say." "It's not kindness, it's truth," she said gently. "You could have walked away that day. But you didn't." Before he could respond, Evelyn returned and smiled. "Mother, I've arranged everything," she said quietly, as if referring to something Michael wasn't meant to hear yet. Margaret nodded and smiled at him. "Michael, I'd like you to visit our home sometime. We live not too far from here, and there's someone I'd like you to meet, someone who could use a man with your heart and your skills." He hesitated, unsure what she meant, but curiosity got the better of him. "I'd be honored," he said. "Wonderful," she said, her smile widening. "Let's make it next week. I'll have Evelyn send you the address." After lunch, as he walked back to his car, Michael couldn't stop wondering what she meant. Someone who could use a man with your heart and your skills. It sounded almost like a job offer, but also something more personal. A few days later, he received a message from Evelyn with a time and address. When he looked it up, his eyes widened. The location was in an upscale area just outside the city. Large homes, gated driveways, and wide gardens. He had never been anywhere near that kind of neighborhood. The following weekend, he drove there, unsure what to expect. The house was beautiful, surrounded by tall trees and bright flowers. The gates opened automatically when he arrived, and a security guard directed him to park near the main entrance. Evelyn greeted him warmly, leading him through the large glass doors. The house was elegant but welcoming, filled with sunlight and the faint scent of lavender. "Mother's waiting in the sitting room," she said. When he entered, Margaret stood up with a bright smile. Behind her on the wall hung large framed photographs, airplanes, company events, and people in uniforms. He looked around, realizing there was something familiar about them. Then in one corner he saw a framed newspaper article. The title caught his eye. "The Story of Skylink Airlines Built from Dreams and Determination" by founder Margaret Hart. He froze for a moment, turning to her in disbelief. You're the owner of Skylink Airlines?" She smiled gently. "Yes, dear. I thought you might recognize the name eventually." He was speechless. He had missed his flight with Skylink, the same airline she had founded. Everything suddenly made sense. The luxury car, the elegant clothes, the confidence. Margaret walked closer, her eyes kind but firm. "You see, Michael, the world is full of people chasing success and comfort, but very few stop for humanity. You missed your flight to help someone you didn't know, and that tells me everything I need to know about your character." Michael felt his chest tighten with emotion. I didn't know," he said softly. "I know you didn't," she replied. "And that's why it mattered even more." He stood quietly for a moment, still processing the truth. He had helped her without knowing who she was, and now she stood before him, not as a stranger, but as someone whose life he had changed. Margaret smiled gently and said, "Michael, I think your journey is about to take a turn you never expected." For a few seconds, Michael didn't know what to say. He stood there in quiet disbelief, looking around the elegant sitting room filled with pictures of airplanes and company awards. The woman he had met at the airport, the one he thought was just another traveler, was actually the founder of Skylink Airlines, one of the largest airlines in the country. Margaret smiled softly, watching his reaction. "You look surprised," she said kindly. I just didn't expect this," he admitted, his voice low. "When I met you at the airport, I thought you were just an ordinary passenger." She chuckled gently. "That day I was. Illness doesn't care about titles or companies, my dear. In that moment, I was just a tired old woman who needed help, and you gave it without hesitation." Michael felt a mix of emotions, shock, respect, and a deep sense of humility. He couldn't believe that the woman he had helped had built something so big. "You've created something incredible," he said quietly. "I've flown with Skylink so many times. I never imagined I'd meet the person behind it." Margaret smiled but shook her head slightly. "Skylink is not just mine. It belongs to every person who believed in it, from the pilots to the cleaners to the passengers who trusted us. I only built the foundation. Evelyn entered the room carrying a tray with tea and small biscuits. She set it on the table and smiled at Michael. "Mother has told me everything about what happened," she said warmly. "You didn't just help her, you reminded us of something we often forget in business." Michael looked at her curiously. "What's that?" "That kindness still matters," Evelyn replied. They all sat down and the air in the room felt peaceful. The smell of freshly brewed tea mixed with the faint scent of flowers from the garden outside. For a moment no one spoke. Margaret poured the tea slowly, her hand steady now, and passed a cup to Michael. "I wanted to meet you again for another reason," she said finally. "Not just to thank you, but to ask for your help." Michael looked puzzled. "My help?" "Yes," she said. "I've been looking for someone to lead a new project for Skylink. It's about improving passenger safety systems, something that aligns with your background, I believe." His eyes widened slightly. "You mean a job offer?" "In a way," she said, smiling. "But not just any job. I want someone who understands that safety isn't just about machines, it's about people." "You've shown me you understand that." He sat back, trying to absorb her words. The idea of working for Skylink, the same company whose flight he had missed, felt surreal. "I'm honored," he said sincerely, "but I'm not sure I'm the kind of person you're looking for. There are people with more experience, I'm sure." Margaret leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Experience can be learned. Character cannot. I've built my company on trust, and I can tell when someone's heart is in the right place." Evelyn nodded in agreement. "We've reviewed your work background, with your permission, of course." Mother was very insistent on it. "Your record is impressive. But what stood out most is your consistency. You've stayed in the same field for years, quietly doing your job well without seeking the spotlight." Michael felt his chest tighten a little. He wasn't used to being noticed for qualities like that. "I don't know what to say," he admitted softly. "Just say you'll think about it," Margaret said with a smile. "I will," he replied. They talked for another hour about his ideas, his work, and how Skylink operated. Margaret listened intently, asking thoughtful questions, while Evelyn occasionally added insights about the company's new projects. Michael shared a few ideas about safety systems he'd been developing, concepts that could help prevent common mechanical errors during takeoff and landing. By the time the conversation ended, the evening sun had begun to fade. The room glowed with a golden light, casting long shadows on the polished wooden floor. Margaret looked tired but content. "I think that's enough business talk for today," she said, smiling warmly. "Michael, thank you for coming. It means a lot." "Thank you for inviting me," he said sincerely. "This has been one of the most unexpected days of my life." Evelyn walked him to the door as her mother rested on the couch. Outside, the garden lights were turning on one by one, glowing softly among the flowers. The air was cool and the faint sound of birds settling in for the night filled the quiet. "My mother doesn't usually open up to people so easily," Evelyn said as they reached the car. "You've made quite an impression." Michael smiled modestly. "She's an amazing person." "It's easy to see why people respect her so much," Evelyn nodded. "She built everything from nothing. But lately, she's been thinking about stepping back and letting others take over. Meeting you seemed to give her some kind of hope." He looked at her curiously. "Hope?" "Yes," Evelyn said softly. "Hope that there are still people out there who lead with heart, not just ambition." Michael didn't quite know how to respond. He simply smiled, thanked her for the hospitality, and drove home. But the entire way her words echoed in his mind. People who lead with heart, not just ambition. That night he lay awake thinking about everything that had happened. A week ago he'd been just another man catching a flight for a business meeting. Now he was being offered a chance to work with one of the biggest companies in the country, all because he'd stopped to help someone who needed it. Life truly worked in strange ways. The next morning, he received a call from an unfamiliar number. It was Margaret's assistant, confirming a formal meeting at Skylink headquarters for the following week. They wanted to discuss the details of the project she had mentioned. He agreed, still half in disbelief. Over the next few days, he prepared quietly. He reviewed his old notes, refreshed his knowledge, and made a small presentation just in case they asked for his ideas. But beneath all the preparation, He couldn't stop thinking about how this had all started with a single decision: to stop and help. When the day of the meeting arrived, he dressed neatly and arrived early. The Skylink headquarters was an impressive building of glass and steel, with a large model airplane displayed in the lobby. The staff greeted him respectfully, already aware of who he was. Word of what he had done seemed to have spread quietly among the employees. He was guided to a conference room where Evelyn was waiting. "Mother will join us shortly," she said. "She wanted to give you a tour of the facility first." As they walked through the building, he noticed the energy everywhere, people working efficiently but with a certain pride. It was clear that Margaret had built not just a company, but a family. Every employee they passed greeted Evelyn warmly, and many smiled at Michael as if they already knew his story. When they returned to the conference room, Margaret was there, looking elegant and strong. "Welcome to Skylink, Michael," she said warmly. "I'm glad you came," he smiled. "I wouldn't miss it." They talked about the new safety initiative, which aimed to improve systems across all Skylink aircraft. Margaret wanted to combine technology with compassion, to make travel not only safer but more humane. "Airlines often forget that every passenger has a story," she said. "Sometimes the smallest safety feature can save a life, or at least make someone feel cared for." Michael presented some of his ideas, and to his surprise, both women listened with genuine interest. They asked questions, made notes, and seemed impressed by his approach. When he finished, Margaret leaned back in her chair and smiled. "You think like someone who's been in the air for years," she said. "Not many engineers understand how people feel when they travel. You do." "Maybe because I've spent a lot of time observing," he said modestly. "People reveal a lot when they're waiting for a flight." She nodded approvingly. "Then I think you'll fit in perfectly here." Before he could even process it, Evelyn handed him a folder. "That's your official offer letter," she said with a smile. "Mother insisted we finalize it today." He opened the folder and read the first few lines. It was an offer for a senior safety consultant position, higher than any job he'd ever held. The salary was generous, but more than that, it came with a note attached in Margaret's handwriting. "For the man who missed a flight to save a life." He looked up, speechless. "I don't know what to say," he said quietly. "Just say yes," Margaret replied warmly. He laughed softly, feeling both overwhelmed and grateful. "Then yes," he said. "Thank you. For everything." As he left the building later that afternoon, the sunlight reflected off the glass windows, casting a warm glow over the Skylink logo. He paused for a moment, looking up at it. It was strange to think how life had turned out, how missing one flight had led him exactly where he was meant to be. Back in her office, Margaret watched him through the window as he walked away. She turned to her daughter and said softly, "He reminds me of why I started all this. Not for the profit, not for the name, but for people like him. Honest, kind, real." Evelyn smiled. "Then you made the right choice, Mother." Margaret nodded slowly. "No," she said, "he did. When he chose compassion over convenience, that was the moment his life changed, and ours too." And somewhere deep inside, she knew that helping that day at the airport had not just saved her, it had brought a good man exactly where he was destined to be. The weeks after Michael joined Skylink felt like a dream. Everything was new but strangely familiar, as if he had always been meant to be there. He arrived early every morning, walking through the glass doors with quiet determination. The staff had heard stories about him, the man who missed a flight to save someone's life, and they treated him with a kind of quiet respect that made him a little shy. He didn't see himself as a hero. To him it was simple. Someone needed help and he was there. Still, he couldn't deny that his life had changed completely because of that one decision. His new role came with responsibilities that were both exciting and challenging. He was in charge of reviewing and improving safety procedures across the airline's entire fleet. That meant long hours in hangars, detailed meetings with engineers, and sometimes even flying out to test new systems himself. But Michael didn't mind. He loved it. Every task, every conversation reminded him that what he was doing mattered. One morning, while walking through the main office, he found Margaret sitting in the lounge area by the window, reading a report. She looked better than she had the first day he met her, stronger, healthier, her eyes full of life. When she saw him, she smiled and waved him over. "Good morning, Michael," she said warmly. "How's the new team treating you?" "They're great," he said with a smile. "I think they're finally getting used to my way of doing things." "Oh? And what way is that?" she asked playfully. He chuckled. "The simple way, listen first, fix later." Margaret laughed softly, closing her folder. "You'd be surprised how many people forget that rule, even in leadership. Listening is the hardest skill to learn." He nodded. "You seem to do it naturally." She gave him a thoughtful look. "It took me years to learn that every person in a company, no matter their role, has something important to say. Once I realized that, Skylink began to grow faster than I could have imagined." They talked for a while about the company's future and the new safety features his team was testing. Margaret listened closely, asking about every detail. She cared deeply about her passengers, and it showed in the way she spoke. After their chat, she said something that stayed with him. "You know, Michael, I've built many things in my life, but the thing I value most now isn't success, it's people like you. People who remind me why kindness still matters." He didn't know how to respond. He simply nodded and smiled. Over the following months, Michael's ideas began to take shape. One of his safety proposals, an upgraded emergency communication system, was approved and scheduled for rollout. When the first flight using his design took off safely, the whole team celebrated. For the first time in years, he felt truly proud of his work. A few days later, he received a handwritten note from Margaret. It was short, but the words were powerful. "Your ideas are not just improving our planes, they're touching lives. Thank you." He kept that note pinned above his desk. Every time work became stressful or overwhelming, he would look at it and remember why he was there. As time passed, he and Evelyn also became good friends. They often worked together on reports and traveled for company meetings. Evelyn admired his calm nature and his honesty, while Michael respected her intelligence and dedication. She had inherited her mother's strength but added her own touch of warmth and humor. One afternoon, during a trip to Seattle for an industry conference, Evelyn and Michael found themselves sitting by the hotel lobby fireplace, sipping coffee after a long day. The conversation drifted to how strange life could be. "You know," she said with a smile, "if you hadn't missed that flight, none of this would have happened." He smiled back. "I think about that a lot. I was so frustrated that day. I thought missing that plane would ruin my chances at work. Turns out it opened a door I didn't even know existed. That's how life works sometimes," she said softly. "We rush toward one destination, not realizing there's a better one waiting nearby." He looked at her thoughtfully. "Do you believe things happen for a reason?" She paused for a moment. "I used to think life was just a series of choices. But after what happened with you and my mother, yes, I think some things are meant to happen." The quiet between them was comfortable. The fire crackled softly, and for a moment neither spoke. The following week, Skylink held its annual award ceremony to recognize outstanding employees. The event took place in the main hangar, which had been transformed into a beautiful hall with lights, music, and a stage. Margaret, dressed elegantly, took the stage to deliver a speech. She spoke about the challenges the airline had faced, the progress they had made, and the importance of compassion in leadership. Then, near the end of her speech, she paused and smiled. "Before I close," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "there's one story I want everyone to hear. A few months ago, I met a man who reminded me that kindness is still alive in this world. He didn't know who I was. He didn't expect anything in return. But his small act of compassion changed more than one life. It changed mine." The crowd was silent, listening closely. "I was the woman who collapsed at the airport that day," she continued. "And the man who stopped to help me is standing here with us tonight. Please join me in thanking Michael Carter." The crowd erupted in applause. Michael, sitting near the back, froze for a moment. He wasn't expecting that. Evelyn gave him an encouraging smile, and reluctantly he stood up. The applause grew louder as he walked to the stage. Margaret hugged him gently. "You didn't just help me," she said softly so only he could hear. "You reminded me why I started Skylink in the first place, to bring people together." When he turned to face the audience, he felt nervous but grateful. He wasn't used to attention. "I just did what anyone should do," he said humbly. "I was in the right place at the right time. That's all." But the people in the room knew it was more than that. After the event, dozens of employees came up to thank him. sharing their own stories about how Skylink had touched their lives. It was a night he would never forget. A few days later, Margaret called him into her office. She looked tired but peaceful. "Michael, I wanted to tell you this personally," she began. "I've decided to step down from my role as head of the company. Evelyn will be taking over." He was surprised. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "Yes, it's time. I want to spend my remaining years watching others carry the vision forward. And I know she'll do it well, with you by her side." Michael didn't quite know what to say. "I'll do my best to honor what you built," he said sincerely. "I know you will," she replied with a smile. "And remember something, Michael. Success is measured not by how high we climb, but by how many people we lift along the way." A few weeks later, Margaret officially retired. The company threw a farewell event full of laughter and tears. She gave one last speech, thanking everyone for their years of loyalty and hard work. When she mentioned Michael again, her voice trembled slightly. "Sometimes life gives us signs in the most unexpected places," she said. "Missing a flight might feel like a loss in the moment, but it could also be the start of something beautiful." Not long after, Margaret moved to a quiet countryside home where she could rest and paint. Evelyn became the new CEO, and Skylink continued to grow stronger. Under her leadership and with Michael as part of her core team, the company introduced several new safety and community programs. Months turned into a year, and one afternoon Michael received a small package at his office. Inside was a letter and a small silver pin shaped like a pair of wings. The letter was from Margaret. It read, "Dear Michael, I wanted you to have this. These wings were given to me when I launched my first plane decades ago. They represent freedom, faith, and courage. You reminded me of all three. Thank you for choosing kindness that day at the airport. The world needs more people like you. With gratitude, Margaret." Michael sat quietly for a long time after reading it. The letter made his eyes sting a little, but it also filled his heart with peace. He pinned the silver wings to his desk, right beside the note she'd written months earlier. That evening, as the sun set behind the city skyline, he stood by his office window and watched a Skylink plane take off. The bright lights blinked as it rose higher into the fading orange sky. He smiled to himself. "I guess I never really missed that flight," he whispered. "It just took me somewhere better." And in that moment, everything made sense: the delay, the choice, the twist of fate. It was as if life itself had been waiting to show him that doing the right thing, even when it costs you something, always leads you exactly where you need to be. Sometimes, the journey you didn't plan becomes the one that changes everything.